What if the reason you've never quite fit in isn't a flaw? What if it's a fingerprint? What if the very thing that has made your life feel harder, lonelier, and more confusing than everyone else's is actually the clearest evidence that you were chosen before you ever arrived? You know that feeling. You're sitting at a table full of people who love you, family, maybe, or old friends laughing at the right moments, saying the right things, playing the part just fine. And somewhere deep inside, there's a part of you watching it all, like a stranger through glass. Present, but not quite there. Connected, but carrying something no one in that room seems to feel. And the hardest part isn't the loneliness. The hardest part is not being able to explain it. Because nothing is wrong. Nobody hurt you. The people around you are good people. But something in you is tuned to a frequency the room doesn't carry, and you've never quite known what to do with that. I've had that conversation more times than I can count. In church lobbies, in parking lots after Sunday service when everyone else had already driven home, in messages from people I've never met who somehow found the words to describe something they'd never been able to say out loud before. And every single time, it's the same thread running through. I feel like I was made for something I can't name yet. Today I want to sit with that. Not rush past it, not explain it away, not make it smaller than it is. We're going to talk about the 144,000, one of the most debated, most misunderstood images in all of Scripture. And I want to be honest with you right up front. I'm not here to build a doctrine or start an argument about theology. What I am here to do is hold up a mirror, because I believe the Spirit uses recognition as a language. And when truth lands in the right place, something in you already knows it before your mind catches up. So let's go through these 11 signs together. And as we do, just notice. Notice what rises up. Notice what lands different. Because that noticing, that's not you. That's the Spirit confirming something that was already written. You've always felt like you were born into the wrong time. Not dramatically. Most people who carry this don't make a scene about it. It's quieter than that, more like a low-level hum of dissonance that you've just learned to live with. Like music playing just slightly out of sync with the room you're in. You can hear both rhythms, but they don't resolve. I think about kids growing up, and there are children who chase whatever everyone else is chasing without a second thought. The approval, the trends, the next thing. And then there are children who sit a little off to the side, not out of arrogance, but out of something that looks almost like patience. Like they're waiting for a conversation that hasn't started yet. Maybe that was you. Maybe it still is. The prophet Jeremiah was told something that stopped him in his tracks. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Now most people read that as comfort, and it is. But it's also something more than comfort. It's a declaration of pre-assignment. It means some people arrive here already carrying a purpose that was decided before they took their first breath, before their parents named them, before they made a single choice. And when you carry an assignment like that, one that belongs to a different order of things than what's immediately around you, you are going to feel out of place. Not because something went wrong, because something went right. The seed that's planted in the right soil for the wrong season still looks wrong from the outside. But the gardener knows exactly what he put there. If you've always felt like you were waiting for something, not restlessly, not anxiously, just waiting, that's not your imagination. That's orientation. You are pointed at something the world around you hasn't seen yet. You absorb other people's emotions like a sponge, and it exhausts you in ways you can't always explain. You walk into a room, and you know immediately, before a single word is spoken, that something is off. Maybe the energy shifted when you came in. Maybe someone is holding a smile that doesn't reach their eyes, and everyone else takes it at face value, but you don't. You can't. Something in you reads below the surface automatically, the way other people read faces. You sit next to someone at church, a stranger, and halfway through the service you realize you're carrying grief that isn't yours. A heaviness settled into your chest, somewhere between the opening song and the offering, and you don't even know where it came from. You just know it belongs to the person next to you. And then you go home tired. Not physically tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that a nap doesn't fix because it didn't come from your body. Most people call this being sensitive, and they mean it kindly. But I want to offer you a different word. Discernment. Because what you're doing isn't just feeling things, you're perceiving things. There's a difference. Feeling is passive. Perceiving is a gift with a purpose. You can tell the difference between someone who is genuinely at peace and someone who has simply learned to perform peace very well. You know when a room feels clean and when it doesn't. You know when someone's words and their spirit are saying two different things. That gift, when you don't understand what it is, feels like a burden. It's overwhelming. It makes crowds hard and small talk exhausting and deep relationships complicated. Because you simply cannot be shallow with people, you always end up somewhere real, whether you plan to or not. But here's what I want you to hear. Every time you quietly absorbed someone's pain in a room and prayed without realizing you were praying, that was intercession. The most real kind. The kind that cost something. And it was never wasted. You've had dreams and moments of knowing that you still can't explain years later. Not fantasies. Not wishful thinking. I'm talking about the dream that woke you up at 3 inches the morning, with something so specific on your heart that you had to get up and write it down. And then weeks or months later, the thing in the dream actually happened, and you stood there with that quiet chill. That's not fear, that's confirmation. Or the knowing. The moment you had a strong sense about someone, a family member going through something, a friend who was about to make a decision, a situation at work, and you didn't have information. You didn't have evidence, but you knew. And you were right. Or the prompting. The nudge to call someone, to go somewhere, to say a specific thing, and when you followed it, you found out later exactly why you were supposed to be there. The Spirit of God speaks in many languages. Scripture is one. But there are others, visions, impressions, a stillness that carries weight, a peace that functions like a compass. Revelation describes the 144,000 as those who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. That kind of following doesn't happen by logic alone. It requires a way of receiving direction that bypasses the rational mind and lands somewhere deeper. You have that receiver. You've always had it. And the fact that the world around you has no category for it, that it makes people uncomfortable when you mention it, that you've learned to keep it mostly to yourself, doesn't mean it isn't real. It means you've been operating in a gift that most people haven't been given access to yet. You've been through seasons of fire that should have broken you and didn't. I'm not talking about ordinary hardship. Everybody faces hardship. I'm talking about the kind of pressure that reshapes the interior of a person. Loss at the level that takes the floor out from under you. Betrayal from people who should have been safe. Seasons where God felt so silent that you questioned everything you thought you knew, and you kept going anyway, not because it felt good, but because something in you simply would not let go. There's a story in Daniel, 3 men thrown into a furnace, turned up so hot it killed the soldiers who threw them in. And when the king looked through the fire expecting ash, he saw something that stopped him cold. 4 figures walking, unhurt. And he said something worth pausing on. The form of the 4th is like the Son of God, not surviving the fire, walking in it, with someone. Here's what I've come to understand about the people who carry the kind of calling we're describing today. The fire is not incidental to their story. It is formational. The things that were supposed to destroy them became the very furnace where the dross was burned away, and what remained was pure. And when they came out on the other side, they didn't smell like smoke, but they carried a presence, a weight, a settledness, a quiet authority that could only have come from what they walked through. You know your furnaces. You know the seasons that should have ended you. And you're here. That's not resilience alone. Someone was in there with you. You carry a grief for the world that has nothing to do with your personal circumstances. This is one of the harder ones to explain, because it doesn't follow normal logic. You can be having a genuinely good day, the family is well, the bills are paid, nothing is immediately wrong, and there's still this low ache in your chest. Not depression exactly, something more like mourning. A sorrow for things that are broken in the world, for people you will never meet, for a creation that has wandered so far from what it was meant to be. You might be in worship on a Sunday morning, singing a song you know by heart, and tears come that you weren't expecting and can't fully explain. Not tears for yourself, something bigger, something that feels almost too large to fit inside one person. Jeremiah was called the weeping prophet. People sometimes read that as weakness, as if he couldn't hold himself together. But I read it as something else entirely. Jeremiah wept because he had been given God's heartbreak for a people who had lost the ability to feel their own lostness. His grief wasn't personal. It was borrowed from heaven, and it cost him everything, socially, relationally, publicly. The intercessors, the prophets, the ones who carry the weight of what God feels for a broken world. They often look melancholy from the outside, but on the inside, that grief is one of the most powerful forms of prayer that exists. If you've ever cried for someone you don't know, or mourned something you can't name, don't pathologize that. That's a burden given to very few, and it is being used in ways you may not see until much later. Truth matters to you in a way that makes you strange to the people around you. You can't pretend. You have tried, maybe for years, in certain relationships or environments, but something in you simply refuses to call a thing what it isn't. Not because you enjoy conflict. Actually, most people with this sign avoid conflict naturally. But you avoid dishonesty more. And when those two things are in tension, honesty wins every time, even when it costs you. This has probably made certain rooms uncomfortable for you. Certain relationships complicated. There have been moments where the path of least resistance was simply to agree, to nod, to let it go, and you couldn't do it. Not out of stubbornness, out of something that functions almost like physical discomfort when falsehood is presented as truth. Revelation says of the 144,000 that in their mouth was found no deceit. That's not just about not telling lies. That's an orientation toward reality as God sees it, uncompromising, even when the truth is inconvenient, even when it separates you from people you love, even when it makes you the person in the room nobody quite knows what to do with. You have paid a price for that orientation. Relationships, opportunities, the ease of simply fitting in. Don't be ashamed of the receipt. Every cost was also a confirmation. I want to pause here for just a second, because if you've made it this far, something is happening in you that's bigger than curiosity. My name is George, and for years I've walked with people who carry exactly what we've been describing. People with an unshakable sense that they were built for something specific, something sealed in them, something they've never had the language to fully name. What you just experienced was not content. It was a mirror, and mirrors demand a decision. If you are ready to go to the root, to finally understand why you think, feel, and perceive differently from almost everyone around you, I put together something called the Secret Protocol. It carries 7 keys that reveal what God placed inside you before you ever drew your first breath. The things no one in your life has ever quite been able to name in you. The full audiobook is included for every moment of your day, your mornings, your late nights, those long drives where you're processing everything in silence. And as a bonus, you also receive the Awakening Map, the 5 stages of spiritual awakening mapped with clarity, showing you where you are right now and what the Spirit is releasing in this exact season of your life. The link is pinned in the first comment. Not for much longer. And you did not make it this far without a reason. Now let's keep going. Because the last 5 signs carry some of the most important things I want you to hear today. You've been through rejection so deep and so repeated that it should have silenced you, and it didn't. Not ordinary social friction. I mean the kind of rejection that comes when you're doing exactly what you were made to do, being exactly who you are, and it still isn't received. When you shared something real from your spirit and watched people look at you like you were speaking a language they'd never heard. When the church misunderstood you, when your own family couldn't quite see what you were carrying. When the people who should have recognized you were the first ones to dismiss you. Joseph was 17 years old when he told his brothers about his dreams. He wasn't being arrogant, he was being transparent. And his brothers, the people closest to him, the people who should have covered him, threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery. But here's what I want you to notice. The text never records a moment where Joseph stopped believing in what God showed him. Through slavery, through false accusation, through years in prison, he carried the dream. And eventually, the dream carried him. Every time you were overlooked, cast aside, misread, or minimized, something in you that could not have been formed any other way was being built. The rejection wasn't the interruption of your story, it was the entrance to it. You have a hunger for the depth of God that Sunday morning alone has never satisfied. Not a criticism of the church, I love the church. But there's a kind of person who sits in a service and worships genuinely and receives what's there, and then goes home, still hungry. Not ungrateful, hungry. Like someone who was given good food, but whose appetite is larger than the portion. You're drawn to the parts of Scripture most people skip. The hard chapters, the mysterious ones. The places where the text opens like a door into something vast, and most readers just close it quickly and move on. You don't move on. You sit in those passages. You come back to them. You bring questions to God in the middle of the night, and sometimes the answers don't come in words. They come in a settling, a peace, a sense that the question itself was the right prayer. When you find a teacher who goes to the deep end, who doesn't flinch from the difficult, who doesn't make the gospel smaller to make it more comfortable, something in you lights up in a way that's almost involuntary, like a lamp that finally found its current. That hunger is not spiritual pride. It's not impatience. It is the appetite of someone who was built for more than the surface level of this faith, and the Spirit in you knows the difference. You've had everything stripped away in a season, and what rose up from the bottom of you surprised you. The job, the plan, the relationship, the version of yourself that people liked and approved of. Gone, sometimes all at once, sometimes one piece at a time across months that felt like years. And instead of bitterness, or instead of the total collapse that made sense from the outside looking in, what came up from the depths of you was worship. Not the performed kind. Not the kind you put on because you knew you were supposed to. Something rawer than that. Something that came from a place in you that the loss couldn't reach because it wasn't built on any of the things that had been taken. Abraham walked 3 days toward a mountain with his son, carrying a command he didn't fully understand, toward an outcome he couldn't see. And at the base of the mountain he told his servants something remarkable. We will go and worship, and we will come back. Both of us. He didn't have the full picture. He couldn't. But he had a knowing that ran deeper than the circumstances, deeper than the fear, deeper than the logic of what he was being asked to do. That's faith at the level of ceiling. And if you have ever worshipped God in the ruins of something you built, if you have ever said thank you when everything in your natural mind was screaming why, then you know what I'm describing. And you know it's not something you manufactured on your own. You love people deeply, but you have never been able to love them in a way that requires you to abandon what you know is true. This one takes some courage to name, because it can sound cold if it's misunderstood. So let me be careful with it. There are people in your life you would walk through fire for. People you've prayed for more times than you can count. People you would give almost anything to see whole and free, and living in what God has for them. And there have been moments, maybe many moments, where the most loving thing you could do was stay steady in truth when they desperately wanted you to just agree and move on. Where you held a line not out of rigidity, but out of genuine care for what was actually at stake. That's not a cold love. That is the love of someone who understands that the kindest thing isn't always the easiest thing. It's the love of someone who has been loved that way by God firmly, faithfully, without compromise, and without withdrawal. The 144,000 are described as those redeemed from among men, set apart, not elevated above others but oriented differently. And the people who carry that set-apart love often find that it looks strange from the outside. Too steady, too anchored, too unwilling to shift when the room shifts. But the people they love, even when they don't say it, feel something in that steadiness that they can't get anywhere else. A safety that doesn't come from agreement. It comes from knowing the person across from them is not going anywhere. Underneath everything, the questions, the hard seasons, the years of feeling like you don't quite belong anywhere, there is a knowing that you belong to God. Not just a belief, a knowing. This is the one. This is the sign that holds all the others together. Because none of what we've described today is comfortable. Carrying the grief of others. Being refined in fire. Being rejected by the people closest to you. Loving in ways that cost. Feeling like a stranger in almost every room you enter. If there wasn't something underneath all of that, something unshakable, something that couldn't be reached by circumstances or silence or the weight of years, most people would have walked away from the faith long before now. But you didn't. And I want to be honest about something. It wasn't because you're stronger than everyone else. It wasn't because your faith was better constructed or your theology was more precise. It was because something held you that you weren't even fully aware of. In the moments when you were closest to letting go, something didn't let you. A peace that came from nowhere. A word that landed at exactly the right moment. A presence in the silence that was quieter than sound and realer than anything you could touch. That's the seal. Revelation talks about the 144,000 having the name of the Father written on their foreheads. And I want you to understand that's not a mark on skin. That's an identity written into the deepest layer of who a person is. An ownership. A belonging that goes all the way to the foundation, and nothing that happens at the surface of your life can reach it, because it wasn't placed at the surface. You have been through enough seasons now to know the difference between things that shake and things that don't. You've stood in the middle of your own storms and watched what held. And you've discovered that what held had nothing to do with your own grip. The Lamb knew your name, not the name people call you, not the version of you that shows up every day and manages everything and tries to make sense of it all. The name the Father wrote before you were formed. The identity sealed into you before your first breath. That's what has been stirring. That's the thing underneath the ache. That's the answer to the question you've been carrying since you were young enough to first feel different and not know why. And the reason this message reached you today on this specific day, in this specific season, is because the Spirit does not put things in front of people randomly. There is a now to what God is doing. A window, a moment, and you made it to the end of this video for a reason. Don't walk away from this moment without responding to it. The wilderness has an exit. And the people who were sealed, who carried the weight, and the fire, and the longing, and the grief, they don't just survive the ending. They're the ones standing when it arrives. Before you go, I want to ask you something personal. Of these 11 signs, which one stopped you? Not intellectually. I mean, which one landed in a place you weren't expecting? Which one put words on something you've been carrying for years, without knowing what to call it? Leave it in the comments, just the number, or a sentence about what it stirred in you. I read those comments, and I believe the things people are willing to name out loud become the beginning of something the Spirit was already building toward. If this reached you today, it wasn't by accident. Share it with one person who needs to hear it, just one, because some messages aren't meant to be received alone. I'll see you in the next one.